The movie begins in France with a professional assassin named Z who is sitting in an abandoned church. At that moment, the person she works for named Vin arrives and assigns her a new mission. He emphasizes that the mission must be carried out that night and instructs her to kill everyone at the location she's going to. Elsewhere, there's an officer named Sai with his colleague Jax in the car, and they seem to be watching a smuggler named Coco. When Coco appears in front of them, they move quickly to arrest him. They interrogate him about the location of the contraband he's hiding, but Coco denies knowing anything about it. Suddenly, Coco moves quickly, strikes C and pulls out his gun. Shooting Jax in the leg, Coco then jumps into his car and escapes, but Sai chases after him, firing shots that cause Coco to lose control of the vehicle and stop. Sai rushes towards the car to apprehend Coco, but he discovers that Coco has fled. Sai chases him until he finds him, and when he sees him, a chase ensues. At this moment, Coco grabs a child and threatens to kill him. Sai asks Coco to let the child go and surrender, but Coco refuses. C is forced to shoot him in the neck, killing him. Meanwhile, Z is on her way to visit her friend, a tailor named Tess, and helps him eat the chocolate he loved because he's suffering from broken fingers. We learn that a customer had beaten Tess and broken 2 of his fingers after Tess refused to deal with him. Z reassures him, telling him that this customer won't be coming back, and mentions that she spoke with him and convinced him to stay away. Tess is surprised and asks how she managed to convince him, especially since the customer seemed like a criminal or a gangster, which is why Tess refused to work with him. Z tells him that she knows how to speak to everyone in a language they understand. Z recalls the moment when she attacked the customer, knocked him to the ground, broke his hands, and threatened to kill him if he ever went near Tess's shop again. Afterward, Tess shows Z the clothes she ordered and tells her that he made all the adjustments she requested. At night, Z heads to a nightclub owned by Lily. There, she enters a private room belonging to a gang leader named Sergey, arrives and asks if she's there regarding the deal, and tells her that he won't return the item he stole from her boss until he's paid for. Z replies that she won't talk until the place is empty. Sergey orders his men to clear the area, leaving only his men and the singer. Jean grabs her phone and sends a message to Coco, informing him of what's happening. We learn that Jean is Coco's girlfriend and keeps him informed about everything that happens at the nightclub. Jean receives a message informing her that Coco is dead. At this moment, Sergey and Z dance together, and suddenly, Z pulls out a knife she had hidden in her clothes and kills Sergey. She then engages in a brutal fight with Sergey's men. During the fight, Jean falls to the ground, hitting her head and loses her sight. After Z takes out Sergey's men, she approaches Jean to kill her, but is surprised to find Jean devastated by the shock of losing her sight. Z feels sympathy for her and refuses to kill her, leaving her and exiting the place. The next day, Z meets Vin at the church. Vin seems angry because Z didn't kill John Z, explains to him what happened to Jean, and that she was moved by her condition and couldn't bring herself to kill her. She tells him that Jean has nothing to do with Sergey's gang, but Vin insists that Jean deserves to die, and orders her to complete the mission and kill Jean. At the same time, C is at the police station with 2 of his colleagues, where he learns about the message Jean sent to Coco. He also finds out that Jean is a singer at the same nightclub where Sergey's gang was killed. C is surprised to learn that only one person killed them all. Back to Z, who disguises herself as a U.S. Embassy representative. She goes to the hospital and pretends to be there to check on Jean, because she is an American citizen. The officer allows her to enter Jean's room. When Z enters the room, Jean senses her presence. Z reassures her, telling her she is a representative from the embassy. Z begins talking to Jean, asking about her injury. Jean tells her that she fell on her head and that the blow caused her to lose her sight. She also mentions that the doctors are unsure if she'll regain her sight or not. Before Z leaves, Jean asks her for a favor. She asks her to call her mother in America and tell her what happened. Jean cries and says that her mother has no one else, and that she's been neglecting her mother and hasn't checked on her in a while. She says that if she gets a second chance, she'll get closer to her mother and never leave her again. At that moment, Z steps back and shuts off the 4th tube, indicating that she has decided not to kill Jean after learning about her story with her mother. Suddenly, C enters the room and introduces himself. Z introduces herself as an embassy representative. C then asks John to describe the person who killed Sergey's men. Z feels threatened and reaches for her gun, but is surprised when Jean tells C that she couldn't make out the killer's features because she fell to the ground during the chaos and lost her sight afterward. Z relaxes and puts her gun back in her bag C then asks Jean about her relationship with Coco the smuggler, to which Jean replies that he was just a customer who came to the nightclub, nothing more. While they're talking, a nurse enters, reopens the IV tube, and leaves. Z realizes that the poison will now flow into Jean's veins and kill her. But she quickly uses her wits and knocks over the IV stand, causing the bag to fall to the ground, then pretends to see that she suddenly lost her balance. Afterward, C leaves the hospital and tells Z that Jean is lying about everything she said. Z smiles and asks him how he figured that out, and he replies that he deduced it from his experience. Z feels relieved that C has no evidence against Jean. She excuses herself and leaves. At that moment, C receives a call from his friend who works at the U.S. Embassy. C mentions that he was just with his colleague from the embassy, but is shocked to learn that the embassy didn't send anyone. C quickly runs after Z, but finds that she has disappeared. It seems that C is impressed by the trick Z pulled off elsewhere. Vin meets with the crime boss he works for, named Joubert. Joubert seems upset because he's about to lose $75 million in a major contraband. Joubert asks Vin about the Arab prince named Majid, and Vin tells him that the police are holding Majid at a hotel for questioning. Joubert becomes even more frustrated when he learns that C is the one investigating the case, as C is the only officer at the police station whom Joubert hasn't been able to get on his payroll. Meanwhile, C goes to the hotel to meet Majid. As soon as Majid sees him, he asks when they'll allow him to leave on his private jet. C responds that it will be soon, but first he wants to know exactly what happened. The scene shifts to the airport, where Majid is on his plane, which is parked on the runway. Suddenly, Sergei and his men appear disguised as police officers. They attack the plane and steal the contraband. Majid snaps out of his flashback and begins to recount what happened to C, but he carefully avoids mentioning anything about the contraband. C shows him a photo of Sergei and his men, asking if he recognizes him, but Majid lies, saying he's not sure if they were the ones who robbed the plane or not. C then shows him a photo of Joubert, telling him that he's the leader of the biggest crime syndicate in Paris, and asks if Majid has any connection to it. Majid hesitates for a moment before denying any knowledge of Joubert. Majid stands up and tells C that he's busy and has a meeting, but C asks him about the item that was stolen from his plane. Majid diplomatically refuses to answer and tells him that he's a guest on French soil, requesting that C release his plane or he'll report it to the embassy. The scene shifts to Z, who meets with Vin and tells him that she couldn't kill Jean lying, that the police had the hospital surrounded. Vin doesn't seem to believe her, as she's a professional assassin, capable of carrying out any mission. No matter how difficult, Vin decides to send 2 of his men to the hospital to eliminate Jean. Realizing the danger, Z steals a motorcycle from a passerby and chases after Vin's men, managing to take them out. Meanwhile, C is at the hospital visiting his colleague Jax and checking up on him. He tells Jax that he met with Majid and says that Majid lied to him about everything. At the same time, Z arrives at the hospital and sneaks into Jean's room without being noticed. She grabs Jean and quickly gets her out before Vin's men arrive to kill her. However, they reach the hospital just in time and spot Z opening fire on her. Sai hears the gunfire and rushes out of Jax's room, only to be surprised when he sees Vin's men shooting at Z. C engages in a gunfight with Vin's men, while Z returns fire and manages to escape. Z heads to the lab and uses one of the tools, but she's taken aback when C raises his gun toward her. Z points her gun back at him and tells him she's trying to save Jean. C responds that he's puzzled by her action, and before Z can reply, Vin's men appear. C and Z clash with Vin's men and manage to eliminate them. Then, Z strikes Vin a powerful blow that knocks him unconscious. Afterward, Z takes Jean and goes to her apartment. The next day, Joubert meets with Majid and asks him about what he said to C. During the interrogation, Majid tells Joubert what happened, confirming that he denied everything and added that he told C that Joubert's men were the ones who killed Sergei's gang. Joubert denies this, insisting he had no involvement, but Majid is not convinced and suspects Joubert of lying, especially since they haven't been able to locate the stolen contraband. Joubert becomes enraged with Majid and starts beating him, his bodyguard, believing that Majid is hiding the contraband and trying to deceive him. Vin intervenes quickly to separate Joubert before things escalate and become dangerous. However, Vin is surprised when Joubert begins to speak to him very badly, hitting him on the shoulder and ordering him to resolve the issue as soon as possible. It appears that Vin is displeased with the way Joubert has treated him. Meanwhile, Z is with Jean, and they are talking. Z is surprised to learn that Jean knows she was the one who killed Sergei's men. Z apologizes for being the cause of Jean's injury, but Jean tells her that she is not to blame, as Jean put herself in this situation by believing that Coco loved her. Jean recounts to Z everything that happened and says that Coco was involved in the contraband heist, but deceived Sergei and his men, stealing the contraband they had taken. Jean continues explaining that she helped Coco because he deceived her and convinced her that he would take care of her and make her a famous singer. She adds that Coco had called an unknown person that night, who gave him the address of a garage in a working-class neighborhood in France. Coco went to that garage and left the car with the contraband there. At that moment, Z becomes angry with Jean because she thought Jean was innocent and had nothing to do with what happened. Z asks Jean to describe the address of the garage containing the contraband, but Jean tells her she cannot describe the address because she doesn't know French streets. Well, Z is surprised and asks why Jean didn't inform the police about the details, and Jean responds that she didn't want to implicate herself. Z decides that Jean must pay the price. She then takes Jean to the abandoned church, where Z raises her gun towards Jean and is about to kill her. At that moment, Z recalls something's affected, causing her to hesitate and not kill Jean. Shortly afterward, Vin arrives and asks Z what she did at the hospital. Z responds that she doesn't like anyone interfering with her work and that she needs to finish the job. She started herself. She tells him that she killed Jean and burned her body. After Vin leaves, Z goes to a room in the church where she hides Jean. At that point, Jean asks Z why she didn't kill her, and Z tells her that Jean reminds her of her younger sister. Z recounts to Jean about her mother and sister, whom she lost due to her work with the gangs, and tells her that Jean still has a chance to change her life for the better. Meanwhile, Vin goes to meet Joubert. While they are talking, a waitress named Shen comes in and serves a drink to Joubert. Suddenly, Shen pulls out a silenced pistol and shoots Joubert. Shen then quietly exits the place. While Joubert falls to the ground and is on the verge of dying, Vin approaches him and tells him that he is the one who stole the contraband from him, hitting him on the shoulder in the same way Joubert had hit him before. He tells Joubert that he was foolish and arrogant and didn't deserve the position he was in. Afterward, Z returns to her apartment and checks the cameras to see what happened. At the same time, she receives a message from Vin asking her to meet him. But before she goes to meet him, she visits her friend Tess, who tells her that a police investigator came asking about her. He gives her the investigator's phone number and informs her of the password that she will need to identify herself when she calls him Z. Then goes to meet Vin, who tells her that he knew she had deceived him and didn't kill Jean. He also knows that he is the one who killed Joubert and that he is the one with the contraband. Vin asks Z to kill C in exchange for releasing. Jean Z asks Vin to confirm Jean's safety first, so Vin pulls out his phone and makes a video call letting Z speak with Jean. But he ends the call quickly. Vin then informs Z that C will be at the market within an hour and wants the operation to be carried out quietly without causing a commotion. An hour later, C is at the market, and it appears he is waiting to meet someone. At the same time, Z is in the building, opposite the market with a sniper rifle at Sai. Meanwhile, Shen is in another building, also with a sniper rifle, targeting Z to eliminate her if she fails to complete the mission. At the same time, Jax arrives and meets CZ realizes that Jax works for Vin and was the one who went to Tess to ask about her. Z confronts. Jax tells him the password and discovers she has uncovered his plot. She demands that he give the phone to Sai or she will kill him. Jax, feeling nervous, hands the phone to C and Z, then shoots Jax, hitting him in the stomach. At that moment, Shen tries to kill Z by shooting at her, but Z evades the bullet using a decoy. She had placed Z, then locates Shen and shoots her, killing her. Z then talks to C on the phone and informs him that Jax is betraying him and working for Vinci. And Z then takes Jax to the car where Jax is in pain and pleads with them to take him to the hospital. However, they insist that he first tell them the location of Jean and the contraband. Jax agrees and tells them the location of the contraband, but says he does not know where Jean is. They then leave him in front of the hospital. They head to the location of the contraband. Upon arrival, Z attacks Vin's men and kills them. Z then calls Vin and tells him that she has the contraband and demands that he release Jean in exchange for it. Shortly after, Vin arrives at the abandoned church and begins searching for Z. Suddenly, Z appears from behind and aims her weapon at him. Vin responds by pulling out his phone and showing her Jean, revealing that one of Vin's men is aiming a weapon at Jean Van. Demands that Z hand over the contraband or Jean will be killed. Z tells him that the contraband is nearby. At that moment, C activates a bomb and places it in the contraband vehicle, then listens to the conversation between Z and Vin. Suddenly, Vin attacks Z and tries to kill her, but she fights him off and knocks him to the ground. Z then quickly exits the church to rescue Jean. However, she is confronted by one of Vin's gang members, Juliet, who shoots at her. During the gunfight, Jean is shot in the stomach. Suddenly, a large number of Vin's men appear and open fire on Z, but C crashes into the scene with his car and joins Z in the fight. At this moment, Vin exits the church and heads towards the contraband vehicle, but C seizes the opportunity and blows up the vehicle with the contraband inside Vin, and his men fall to the ground. C and Z take the opportunity to get Jean inside the church. They then engage in a gunfight with the remaining members of Vin's gang and manage to eliminate them all. Only Juliet remains, and Z attacks her, beating her violently until she kills her. At this moment, Vin manages to overpower C and shoots him in the stomach, then grabs the gun and aims it at Z. Z talks to Vin to buy time until C throws her the gun. Z grabs the gun and shoots Vin, killing him. Afterward, they go to Jean and find that she has recovered and regained her sight. Days later, Z stands on a high place and watches Jean leaving the hospital, running to her mother and hugging her while crying. Then Z calls C and thanks him for everything he has